Hi everyone, it's Astra. Today's video is going to be a part 2 to my Let People Use the Bathroom That They Desire video, which I'll leave in the comments. There are a couple reasons why I decided to make this video. The main one is being that I left some points off that I think that I want to address, mainly some counter arguments from kind of the right. Now I want to be very careful when I say the right, because there are a lot of ideologies and thought patterns and people that will have actually will agree with the idea that transgender or genderqueer people can use, or questioning people can use the other bathroom than the one that they were assigned at birth, the sex that they were assigned at birth. So I'm not really going to be, I want to be careful when I use that terminology. Although it is kind of simplistic to just say the right. So I want to address some counter arguments. Another thing is I noticed that it was one of my more disliked videos. I did not receive so far any counter arguments to what I was kind of saying. So this video is just going to be kind of addressing some of the more alarmist kind of the claims that the right likes to use towards usually transgender females and assigned male at birth people using the woman's bathroom, so to speak. Their main claim being that it is bone density and muscle mass leading to a power imbalance. That women may not be comfortable with that bathroom being used. These are just some arguments that I'm going to be addressing. I do want to say that it kind of made me a bit miffed, the fact that people disliked the video without any sort of trying to reach out to me or trying to express themselves on the comment section. But I guess it is fair to say that it does take kind of a bit of bravery to post on a public comment section, even though this is a small channel. You can see the calico kitten in the back. Just making sure that, she's staying out of trouble. Yeah. Those are some of the main reasons why I want to make this video. Also, I kind of got into a debate on a political server last night over this. So, one of the main things that some of the people that are more against this idea, one of the common themes is that rapes, sexual violence, sexual crimes, they may end up going up as a result. They may end up going higher. What I would like to say is that for the majority of the public restrooms, or even, I think this should extend to private businesses, but for the majority of restrooms, in like buildings, shopping centers, museums, malls, workplaces, things of that sort, we now have essentially 24/7 video surveillance in the majority of places. And on top of that, we also have other people as witnesses. So it would be quite unwise for somebody that would want to do a sexual crime like rape to actually go into one of these bathrooms and commit the crime there, given the fact that we have extensive surveillance. We have things like, phone usage now, so 911. We have more witnesses to this sort of thing. So that's kind of, what we have more tools to kind of solve these crimes. What I will also say is that if somebody is actually planning on doing a sexual crime, this issue is not really going to hinder or stop them. So what do I mean by this? Well, bathroom bill crimes, you're probably going to get like couple months in prison, maybe a heavy fine if you go into the other bathroom. If you make the laws extremely, extremely strict or very heavy punishment, you'll have things like people will start to get scared of accidentally walking into the wrong bathroom, right? If the crime is extremely heavy. And there's a chance that they can be charged with a crime with an extremely heavy sentence, right? And it just doesn't logically make sense to put it up there with like murder and rape and shit by entering the other bathroom, right? If you're going to make it illegal. So it's like it's like um it's like a 20,000 calorie meal and worrying about a 300 calorie Coca-Cola versus a 0 calorie Diet Coke. What do I mean by this? If somebody is planning to do a sexual crime that will land them in jail for 10, 15, 20 years, ruin the rest of their lives pretty much, they have to be on a sex offender registry, which means they could have verbal or physical confrontations with people. People could visit their houses. They could have internet restrictions, access restrictions. They're not going to care about some, kind of minor, crime added on, entering the wrong bathroom than assigned at birth, if that makes sense. Even if it is a felony, right? Even if it is a felony, the fact of the matter is that rape and sexual assault and things of the nature are, just make sure these kittens are not getting into trouble here. They're some of the most, some of the crimes with the heaviest sentences, so to speak. And so, it's like basically like this kind of thing is not going to stop a sexual predator. And even if we say that it did, right? Even if it did, it would not take much for a predator to kind of realize that there are many kind of like, areas that they could go to besides public bathrooms in a store where they're likely to get caught. Like, that's the thing too with the bathroom factors. You don't know when somebody's going to walk in. So if you think, you're fine and you're going to carry out this crime, there could be somebody that comes, in and right away. And you wouldn't really, depending on where you were, you wouldn't really know them. So I would think that would drive a lot of fear in those kinds of sexual predator criminals. But what I will say is that this isn't really going to stop them. This is just going to make it so that they can. This is just going to make it so that they will go to other places, besides the bathrooms. Like I don't know, like a park in the middle of the night. Find a vulnerable person to I don't know, kidnap or rape if it's particularly a section, like an area where not a lot of people are visiting, where there are likely to be kind of lower amounts of witnesses. These two were very mischievous, so to speak. So I've had to make a lot of reruns of this video actually because these troublemakers. So that's the main claim that I'm going to use, is that for the majority of restrooms in private businesses and in public buildings, like government buildings, this is going to be, it's not a smart idea with now all of the surveillance, all the technology, all of the witnesses to do something like this. And so I do not think that there will actually be a significant increase in violence as a result. And or sexual violence as a result. And I think that if somebody is that bad-natured, that they will find other ways to do the crime, even if, this bathroom bill does, quote-unquote, prevent them from doing it, basically. So that's my main claim against this very alarmist claim that, if you let genderqueer, transgender people specifically use the women's bathroom, that there will be a power imbalance and more sexual violence cases. I think that is wrong. I do not find that to be correct. So then comes the question, right? Because we've already talked about, tough on crime, right? If there are transgender women that pass, which by the way, you wouldn't be able to tell because that's the entire point of passing, right? And so there'll be a lot of people that'll say, "Well, I've never seen somebody, that passes." And it's like, "Yeah, because you would unless you talk to them, right? If you're just physically running into them somewhere, like in a store, you're not going to be able to tell. That's the entire point of passing. That is the entire point, right? So if you're going to have somebody that is a male at birth and they look like a woman and they use the male bathroom, or vice versa in this situation, right? Then you're going to have a lot of law enforcement calls, disruption to private businesses, kind of manager and staff at businesses, physical altercations potentially to the individual that's just trying to express themselves differently from kind of the societal norm. In this case, changing one's gender expression. Um, it will waste taxpayer money because of potential law enforcement interactions. There may be more complications. Like some people have, panic attacks or psychiatric syndromes whenever they see an armed police officer coming, to kind of chat with them over this issue. Risk of kind of complications happening, risk of taxpayer money being wasted, private businesses disrupted, things of that sort, for a law that's not even being broken, right? Because they're using the bathroom that they were assigned at birth. So that is my main kind of claim against the right, is that it just doesn't make sense for these sexual predators to use public restrooms to do these kinds of crimes. Does it happen? Yes, it does happen. But do I think that if this law were passed, for example, that we would see a dramatic rise in sexual violence? No. Because of the nature, the mindset, the psychology of a rapist, at most, they would just find another location to do it. And it would honestly probably be even worse. Because at least with the public bathrooms, there's like a chance somebody walks in. There's a chance somebody hears, right? But if somehow they weren't able to, I would rather them take the chance and do it in somewhere where it wasn't, or somebody could intervene, versus somewhere where the kind of victim there's no chance of them being kind of honestly, I would rather hope for none of this, right? Nobody deserves that. But you understand. I think that, in that sense, it might even actually be worse. So this is kind of the thing that I'm addressing to the right, some of the right. And of course, if you're going to have law enforcement officers responding to these social disputes, then you're also going to have, it also takes it takes resources off of things like highway emergencies, like armed kind of like criminals, armed robberies, for example, right? And you could say, well, the police officer would obviously stop what they're doing, and then they would go solve that issue. Like they would say, stay here, and then they would go over to, okay, but that takes time. That takes time to get to the car. The Walmart may be out of the way, in which case, if the call didn't happen in the first place because it was legal, then there could have been a life saved. Maybe somebody didn't get murdered. Maybe somebody that was kind of bleeding out somewhere, they got saved. Because EMS doesn't always arrive before police arrive. In fact, it's often the opposite. Police arrive before EMS arrives. So that's all I'm saying. Right? That's basically all that I wanted to add to that. So was there any other kind of points that I wanted to use? I'm trying to kind of, think. Aw, you are very sweet. I think that's kind of maybe the main things that I want to talk about. I think genuinely that there are a lot of other cultures, and I want to use this very cautiously. So, first of all, I want to address another claim that might come up, which is that I'm a far leftist. And obviously, I don't like the American justice system. And so, this kind of talk may seem hypocritical. Like, well, you don't care about law enforcement. You don't care about, um, you don't like the justice system. So now you're talking about law enforcement all of a sudden? Yes, because even though I have mixed feelings on law enforcement and especially the justice system in this country, the fact of the matter is that somebody has to get to that car crash and somebody has to get to that armed robbery, right? And so if we have a, kind of reactionary kind of force, a broken, corrupt system, that's what we have to work with. Does that make sense? That does not mean all of a sudden that, oh, I'm super pro Leo when I want to be and when it doesn't benefit. No, that's not how it works, right? This is, yes, we have to work with this system that I don't like, but it's all we have. So that's all I really wanted to state. I don't think that anything would rise as a result because of that. And I think that with time, and I feel like with time, people would become more comfortable with this sort of thing if it were legalized. We would have a lot more peace. We wouldn't have, people that are trying to express themselves in different clothing have to worry that the police would be called on them, which again, if this is the reality, it's kind of a freedom of expression, restriction, right? And it actually affects more than the, 0.5%. This is another thing that the right uses is, well, it's only about 0.5% of the population. Okay, that's true, but it actually affects everyone because now everybody has to live with the fact that maybe if they want to consider this, or maybe even, they're not considering transitioning at all, that is taken away from them. And that's half of it, right? It's not necessarily the fact that you use the right. It's also the fact that you know that you have the right. And so this doesn't affect 0.5%. And we also don't even know, how many people are kind of hiding from, say, unaccepting parents, for example, or an unaccepting community, and kind of deciding not to pass or go in the direction of passing because of fear of verbal kind of verbal kind of tirades. So we don't even know if it's 0.5%, but assuming that we take that 0.5% figure, it is so much more than that. It affects everyone because this is ultimately a right given to everyone or a restriction given to everyone. It's just that some people decide to use it and some don't, if that makes sense. I think there are a lot of things in other cultures that I'm going to be careful here because there are genuinely things in other cultures that I would consider morally reprehensible, right? And so I'm not going to use the claim that anything, well, this culture over here, they're doing this thing, and so we should accept it, right? That's a universal thing, and that's risky territory. I'm not going to do that. But what I am going to say is that I think that over time that people would get desensitized to it and eventually it would become normalized and then nobody would make a big deal over it anymore. I think it is because of alarmism and kind of the old school thought that, and also because the political duopoly likes stirring shit up more and more and more, and the Democratic Party is a flop, that people are continuing to fear this, that people are continuing to kind of fear us being, in the women's bathroom, or vice versa. There was a transgender school shooter recently. So now all of a sudden the 1.5 million of you are mentally ill. This is another thing real quickly before I go. The main video is done. But this is just one more thing that I want to talk about, is that some of the right likes using what I call feedback loops. Now, what do I mean by this? Right? So they use things like studies a lot, right? Like, these people are mentally ill, or these people, we shouldn't support them with as many resources because they're not as capable. Let's take the second, for example, like racial groups. Some of the right will say this, right? Maybe it's not something as bad as like executing them or whatever, which would be genocide. Maybe it's we shouldn't give as many resources to like support education and things like that. Well, if you don't do that, the scores will drop. And then they'll look at the scores and they'll say, see, we need to do even more. And it's a feedback loop. So they'll say, okay, less of this, and then the metric will continue to be more negative. And it's a feedback loop that they keep playing on. And it's the same thing with the transgender thing, where they'll say that, transgenders are mentally ill people, and that we're going along with mental illness, which is not true. The treatment for gender dysphoria is gender affirming care, because it is the dysphoria causing the discomfort. The dysphoria being that we look male, we looked like we're assigned at birth, right? That is the mental illness. It is not we are going along with the mental illness by doing these treatments. The treatments are meant to combat the dysphoria that we have because we look male, because we are assigned birth at male. If that makes sense. So they'll say things like, well, they have high suicide rates, right? If you actually look at trans suicide rates, a big part of it is because of like bullying and non-acceptance, families cutting them off. And so if the public becomes more hostile to them, what do you think the suicide rates are going to do? They're going to continue to rise. And then what is the right going to do? Right? They're going to say, look, it's gone up year after year. And so they're going to continue doing this over and over and over again, and nobody's going to point out that this is the problem, right? And so the right likes to do some of the right likes to do things like that, which I think is also something to explore. Anyways, I think that's all I have, and I will see you all in the next video. Astra is out.